So in order to make any assessment, as I said last time, the main focus, right, during the semester we are going to make, right, what kind of standard you are supposed to use to evaluate, student assessment item. So first of all, we are going to take a look at the NCTM standard in order to see what doing mathematics is. From my perspective, in order to understand what is the teaching and learning in mathematics, you should understand at least 4 of them. This is a minimum requirement. First of all, you need to think about what is your goal and objective in your teaching and student learning. Second one, what kind of a conceptual framework and structure you are going to use. Whether you accept it or not, if you're going to teach any mathematical contents, you're already using some structure, right? What is the first one you are going to use at the beginning of the class, right? What is second? What is third in the middle of class? How can you summarize, right, your class? That's going to be structure, right? So conceptual framework and structure, another important issue in your teaching, in teaching and learning mathematics. What about the teaching method? For instance, I'm going to teach any mathematics based on lecture, based on teaching, right? Or I can use small group work instead of teaching by myself. Make sense to you? That is the one of the simple example of teaching method. But in Korea, the most important thing, I think, from my perspective, is assessment, right? Because most of students focus on assessment, right? In order to, for instance, in order to enter any university. Otherwise, you are going to fail, right? Even if you are going to study hard, if you are going to fail in assessment, what happens? Right? You know the result. Therefore, assessment and instruction must be integrated. Many math educators and any math education research, it is emphasized that assessment and instruction must be integrated. Therefore, assessment and instruction or teaching and learning are inseparable, right? You cannot separate both of them. They are closely related to each other. That's going to be problematic. However, from time to time, I can see some teachers, to them at least, they are going to be separable. Right? So you need to focus on their interwoven process in your teaching. So based on 4 components at least, you need to think about your teaching as well as student learning in mathematics. I think in the future society, from my perspective or other math educator perspective, instead of separate knowledge, right, holistic knowledge is much more preferable. Do you agree with that? What about passive knowledge or passive engagement versus active engagement? If you're going to be a CEO of any company, what kind of person who has either active engagement or passive engagement, which person do you like to select as a CEO of your company? Probably you want active engagement, right, person. What about process versus results? Maybe from time to time, result is more important than process, right? But from my perspective, as time goes by, process, right, from time to time, much more important. But especially in learning mathematics, I think process is much more important than result, right? Anyway, think about it. Also, multidimensional content rather than one-dimensional content, it is obvious, right? For instance, interdisciplinary study. Well, you have heard many times STEAM, right? What is a STEAM, by the way? STEAM. As a math educator or as a pre-service teacher, you should know that term. In Korea, we often use that term, STEAM. What is that? It's initial, by the way. 두레야. What about STEAM? What is S? 성수야. Science, right? What about T? 정문아. Right. Science, technology, and what is E? Not education. Over there, engineering. What about A? Art. What about the last one, M? Mathematics. Therefore, it is called STEAM, S-T-E-A-M. Science, technology, engineering, art, and mathematics, right? This is kind of interdisciplinary study. How can we teach mathematics through the STEAM? In other words, it's a combined subject, not only one subject, okay? Therefore, multidimensional content might be important, right, in the near future. So why do you need to care about mathematical essays? Think about this way. There are many reasons. You may draw any reason related to mathematical essay, why this is so important, but I'm going to provide just a few examples. Assessment should support the learning of important mathematics and furnish useful information to both teachers and students, according to the NCTM standard. But one of the important questions, what kind of mathematical knowledge and performance are valued, right? Think about what kind of mathematical knowledge and performance are valued, do you think, from your perspective as a pre-service teacher? Just memorizing skill, like, 9 by 9 equals 81. After memorizing any formula, for instance, square root formula, right, in order to solve quadratic equation. If a student have no idea why that formula can work for any quadratic equation, do you think that's enough? Or just if a student feel, mathematics is not useful subject in our life, but because in order to enter university, they think they need to study mathematics. But that's enough? At least in the worldwide perspective, that kind of knowledge is not enough for students. That's why math educators, mathematicians are investigating a lot of research on student understanding. And we think about what kind of mathematical knowledge and performance are valued from your perspective. Just you ask yourself, what kind of knowledge and performance are valued in my mind as a pre-service teacher? Also, you need to think about related to this one, as I said, instruction, right? And assessment are inseparable, as I emphasized, right? Then you should think about formative assessment rather than summative assessment. Do you understand what is the formative and summative assessment? What is formative assessment? In Korean, what is called? For your better understanding. Do you know what is the Korean instead of formative? 혜중아, do you think what is it instead of formative? 모르겠어요? Right. 형성평가. What about summative? Yeah. 총괄평가. Do you understand? So what is the meaning of that? So think about what is the formative assessment, why formative assessment should be emphasized rather than summative assessment. As I said, right? Assessment here should support the learning of important mathematics and furnish useful information to both teacher and student. So if you are going to shift your perspective on assessment, probably you can change your ways of doing assessment in your classroom. That's why you need to think about from NSTM standard perspective, what is assessment? What is the definition of assessment? Why am I doing assessment in the classroom? Make sense to you? So basically, one of the main purpose, right, in doing assessment is to better teach students, right? How to teach student better. Well, how can you make student better understand mathematics, right? Then you cannot just give you one chance and then you cannot do mathematics. I want to give you up. That's not going to be good way of approaching, right? Teaching mathematics. Therefore, you need to communicate with your student more often or more efficiently or more effectively, right? Therefore, I think formative assessment is much more important than summative assessment, especially in your teaching, step by step, right? Well, if 50 or 80% of students cannot follow you, you need to adjust, right? Your teaching content as well as your teaching method. So I hope you are going to change your perspective on assessment after looking at the assessment standard for school mathematics. Or just even, you may not change your perspective. You need to think about, oh, that's going to be useful information, or that's going to be useful perspective on assessment after looking at assessment standard for school mathematics. Just think about, and after sitting relaxed, just think about what is assessment while I'm explaining, the standard, okay? Just to think by yourself until now, what is assessment to you? But after looking at several slides related to assessment, you need to think by yourself, what kind of perspective I should change based on NCTM standard, okay? I'm going to ask you one question, maybe several of you, after explaining what perspective you should change, okay, after looking at the several slides. So reflect the mathematics that students should know and be able to do. This is obvious, right? Assessment should reflect, right, the mathematics students should know and be able to do. Also enhance mathematical learning, right? Otherwise, so in assessment there is some aspect, right? Lack of aspect. What about promote equity? Have you ever thought about this issue? Assessment is fair enough to all students? That's another important issue. What about an open process? After giving some problem set to student, you have never shown to your student solution. You need to understand by yourself, That's going to be a good way. If you're going to be genius, you can solve it, but you cannot. What about promote valid inference? After looking at score, if you're going to get 100% out of 100, students are perfectly understand all the content which I'm supposed to teach, right? Scoring is valid inference. What about the coherent process? As I said, instruction and assessment, right, are related to each other. While at the beginning of the semester, did I clarify the purpose, objective of my teaching? Right? Last class, did you understand the purpose and objective of this course? It was clarified? Do you think what to do during the semester? What am I going to do in this course during the semester? Did you realize? Yes, 2 days ago? Think about what is the goal, what is the objective of the course, as well as what kind of instruction is going on at the end or in the middle of the semester, what kind of assessment are going to use you, right? All those perspectives should be related to each other. Take a look at, first of all, I'm going to take a look at more precisely each perspective. Take a look at mathematics standard. Assessment, as I said, should reflect the mathematics all students need to know. Just think about in mathematics perspective. However, there are many questions you should ask by yourself. For instance, what mathematics is reflected in the assessment? For instance, you may ask your student just the skill, right? After providing quadratic equation, you can just ask, what is solution? Whether quadratic formula or any other formula we use does not matter to you. You just ask your student just what is the answer, and then you can just check correct or incorrect. Or your score is out of 10 problem, you're correct in 10 problem, so therefore you're 100%. That's enough. Think about what kind of mathematics is reflected in the assessment. Just answer correct, wrong answer incorrect. Well, have you ever looked at any process, thinking process, student thinking process in their problem solving? What about what efforts are made to ensure that the mathematics is significant and correct? What about how does the assessment engage students in realistic and worthwhile mathematical activity? What kind of mathematical activity are valued in your classroom as a precept teacher? If a student just follow your guideline or your direction in problem solving, that's enough? Well, do you really want your student to create new idea? Think about that issue. What about how does the assessment enlist the use of mathematics that is important to know and be able to do? There are two important parts, right? If your student work on assessment, they should have some knowledge, right? Another important thing, they should work on some activity. For instance, by using their hand, right? They're supposed to solve based on their knowledge, right? Therefore, in your classroom, you may, at the beginning of the semester, you may emphasize what is the purpose, what is the objective of your teaching. So those goal and objective are emphasized in the assessment, right? How does the assessment fit within a framework of mathematics to be assessed? You made some idea, right? During the semester, you emphasize many mathematics, right? For instance, in your classroom. But what kind of mathematics do you want to include in your assessment, right? What if some student just study half of the content? Because of lack of time, she or he may not study the other half of, mathematics. So what do you think? That's fair enough in terms of assessment? What about some student, because he didn't catch up the first half of the content, but he understood the later half of the content. Both of them should get 50% out of 100, do you think? That's fair enough? There are many questions, right? Therefore, framework. What kind of framework you are going to use is an important issue in terms of mathematics. What inference about the student mathematical knowledge, understanding, thinking process, and disposition can be made from the assessment? All these components, I'm going to give you opportunity to create this kind of assessment item during the semester. Another issue is the learning standard. As I emphasized before, assessment should enhance mathematics learning, right? How does the assessment contribute to each student learning of mathematics? Have you ever thought about this issue? Before this time, have you ever thought about assessment should enhance mathematics learning? Or just evaluate student understanding of mathematics in order to discriminate, right? You are 5% top, you are 10% top. You are just, 50% level of understanding. It's kind of a different perspective, right? Assessment, the purpose of assessment is not only just, evaluate student understanding of mathematics, right? Another important perspective of assessment should enhance student mathematical understanding. After finishing assessment, for instance, students better understand mathematics, they learn. Do you agree with that? After, for instance, finishing midterm exam, oh, I didn't realize this part, right? I should study this part, right? Because I thought this way, but this is kind of inappropriate way. I need to approach this problem in this way, something like that, after finishing midterm exam. Therefore, after finishing midterm exam, maybe some students better understand mathematics, right? Which was covered during the half of the semester. What about how does the assessment relate to instruction? Do you think, in your instruction, did you emphasize enough this kind of, problem set is going to be in the assessment? Students cannot expect what kind of problem they are going to solve in the midterm, in the final exam, right? How does the assessment allow students to demonstrate what they know and what they can do in novel situation? How does the assessment build on each student understanding, interest, and experiences? How does the assessment involve students in selecting activity, applying performance criteria, and using results? How does the assessment provide the opportunity for students to evaluate, reflect on, and improve their own work, that is to become independent learner? There are a lot of things is going on in terms of student learning, right? Obviously, you really want your student to be independent learner, right? They can do mathematics by themselves, right? After finishing the course, at least based on the content you teach. I emphasize mathematics standard as well as learning standard, but there is still another issue. Because you are all Korean, you may not sense of this kind of equity issue. But in the United States, maybe multicultural country, they do have this issue. But I think in the near future, maybe in 5 or 10 years, right? Second generation, maybe in Korea, we are going to have multicultural environment. Do you agree with that? I heard one news, I think, maybe from East Asia, right? Some people from East Asia, the population of them are increasing dramatically during the last maybe 5 to 10 years in Korea. Therefore, if you're going to be a teacher, maybe in 5 to 10 years, you are going to see in your classroom some of your students from East Asia. They may not speak Korean very well compared to other students. Their parents is Korean. Anyway, so assessment should promote equity. Therefore, you need to think about this issue as well as pre-service teacher. What opportunity has each student had to learn the mathematics being assessed? How does the design of the assessment enable all students to exhibit what they know and can do? How is the role of student background and experience recognized in judging their responses to the assessment? One of the good examples of this is a linguistic issue. For instance, while I was in the United States, I taught several students from Korea. But what is the most difficulty they do have in learning mathematics, do you think, in the United States? They just graduate middle school and they transfer to high school, or after graduating high school, they transfer to the university. What kind of problem most significant to them for their learning mathematics? Guess what? Obviously, linguistic issue. For instance, some high school students are doing very well in mathematics. However, what is the most important problem to them? For him to understand mathematics, do you think? After reading the problem, he cannot understand what is the problem is. Because it is written, right? The problem is written in English. If I'm going to translate that problem into Korean, he simply realized, oh, that's a very simple problem. Because he's not familiar with the mathematical term. Make sense? Therefore, if you are going to evaluate mathematics, student understanding mathematics, what about the other issue should be considered? One simple issue is a linguistic issue. You need to think about. What about the cultural issue? For instance, in Korean pizza, nowadays it has been changed, but pizza or any American culturalized item is a good item in order to evaluate student understanding of fraction or any number sense. Anyway, you need to think about this issue as well. How the scoring guide accommodate unanticipated but reasonable responses. So in your mind, I have a good example. For instance, while I was a pre-service teacher in the United States, I taught to my students two division model. One is sharing. The other is partitive. Have you ever thought about that? What is sharing? 12 divided by 3. There are two different interpretations possible, right? One is sharing. For instance, I have 12 apples. Well, there are 3 persons. For instance, DJ, what is it? TK, MB. If I'm going to distribute 12 apples to 3 persons, right? How many apples each person get? This is obviously sharing model, right? Well, what about how can you interpret this one differently? 12 divided by 3. Measurement or partitive. For instance, this is 12 units. 6, 3. Let's say this is 12 units, right? If you're going to have in order to make one hot dog or any one item, you need 3 units. So how many this unit can you make, right? Make sense to you? This is partitive, or it is called repeated subtraction, right? They both are different interpretation, right? So I ask my student these 2 different models and write a story problem. But while I'm grading, I understood student response incorrectly because he wrote about half of the page. It's a long story. But after debating for some time with the student, I realized he is correct. In my mind, I don't have any anticipate responses in my mind, that kind of anticipate responses. Therefore, I cannot see his responses is correct or not. Make sense to you? So therefore, you need to think about, open your mind to different answers, even unanticipated but reasonable responses. Otherwise, you may have some bias, right, in terms of grading that problem. It's not that simple, right? Because you cannot understand it's wrong? No, right? Even if you cannot understand, right, it can be correct. If you take a look at carefully that problem solution. Make sense to you? Therefore, you need to open your mind to unanticipated but reasonable responses. I hope you understand better. Therefore, equity is another important issue. However, the effect of bias being minimized throughout the assessment. To what source can difference in performance be attributed? So this is, I already explained. Do you think, for instance, in your final exam, one student got a 70 out of 10, out of 100. The other student, 90 out of 100. Do you think that 20%, 20-point differences make sense to you? The student who got the 90% out of 100 is really good at, like 90%. What about the 70%, 60%? Is the scoring is representative, do you think? That's another important issue. That's why assessment is not that simple. What source can differences in performance be attributed? It's really, the difference is really related to student understanding and ability of mathematics. That's going to be a big question, right? You should ask in your mind. That is equity, standard. You can carefully read all of the items before working on your final project. Otherwise, at the end of the semester, I'm going to ask you a serious problem. Okay? So based on this standard, you need to think about what am I going to do? Why this is so important? Openness standard. Assessment should be an open process. In other words, how the student become familiar with the assessment process and with the purpose, performance criteria, and consequence of the assessment. I already explained, right? All of your students should understand what is the purpose, what is the objective of this course, right? What kind of instruction is going on? Based on that instruction, what kind of assessment is going to show up in the middle of semester or at the end of semester, right? So instruction should emphasize the content related to assessment. That is obvious, right? Also, one of the important things is that students should be familiar with the purpose, instruction, and assessment. Otherwise, it is really difficult for you to communicate with your student about your teaching. What about how are teacher and student involved in choosing tasks, setting criteria, and interpreting results? What access do those affected by the assessment have to task scoring or performance criteria and sample of student work that have been scored and discussed? And how is the assessment process itself open to evaluation and modification? Also, how is the public involved in the assessment process? So this one is, your assessment is fair enough. Even if anyone can take a look at, oh, that's fair enough. All students, reasonably treated in terms of assessment. Inference standards. As I already explained one example, assessment should promote valid inferences about learning. For instance, what evidence about learning does the assessment provide? So if you're going to student get a 50% out of 100, student understanding only half of the content out of the content you're teaching. Well, if a student get 100% out of 100, student fully understood all the content you're teaching, that's going to be an issue, right? Is professional judgment used in making inference about learning? How sensitive is the assessor to the demand the assessment make and to unexpected responses? Obviously, you need to think about this issue I already explained. How is bias minimized in making inferences about learning? So you always need to think about, the assessment I develop is fair enough to all students. What efforts are made to ensure that scoring is consistent across student and schools and activity? What multiple sources of evidence are used for making inference and how is the evidence used? What is the value of the evidence for each use? For instance, in my class, I'm going to give you an example. A lot of evidence I'm going to use, right? For instance, peer evaluation, right? Miscellaneous item, group work, attendance, right? For your final grade, I'm using several evidences, right? I should provide a rationale. If you are going to ask me, teachers, why are you using this kind of evidence to decide our final grade? I need to answer to you that question, right? Reasonably or persuasively, right? If you are not going to agree with me, I need to tell you why I select this kind of evidence to evaluate your final grade. So what kind of value of the evidence for each use you need to think about. The last one, the sixth, last one, coherent standard. I already emphasized, assessment should be a coherent process. In other words, how is professional judgment used to ensure that the various parts of assessment process form a coherent whole, right? Also, how do students view the connection between instruction and assessment? If your student feel, oh, my teacher teach totally different content compared to assessment, that's going to be problematic, right? I don't think that's good teaching then, if a student feel that way. So you need to think about. Student at least view the connection between instruction and assessment. Oh, my teacher emphasizing this one. Obviously, in the midterm, in the final exam, I can expect what kind of content should be in the assessment. How does the assessment match its purpose with its use? Obviously, purpose, objective, another important issue, right? At the beginning of semester, I emphasized, right? What is the purpose? What is the goal? What is the objective of this course, right? Make sense? Assessment can be related to that purpose, goals, and objective. That should be, right? How does the assessment match the curriculum and instruction practice? How can assess practice inform teachers as they make curriculum decision and determine their instructional practices? What is the ping pong software I'm using? Because by using ping pong software, I can realize what kind of understanding as of now do you have. After looking at your responses, your understanding, or your written responses, I may adjust my teaching content, right? Because you may not follow my the content you're supposed to understand from my perspective, right? Then you may be lower your content level, right? Otherwise, student cannot follow you. Make sense to you? That's why formative assessment is so important. From time to time during the semester, you cannot just after teaching whole semester and at the end of class, you cannot just provide the final exam. So this is your final grade based on final exam. I think that's not that good idea, even if many mathematicians doing that way. But in my course, I try to do as much as I can formative assessment, because I really want to know your understanding level of the content during the semester, not only at the end of a semester. So, once again, therefore, I'm emphasizing what kind of content you are going to work on. During the semester, as I said, how to develop assessment item. This is one purpose in this course. What about second one? How to make evaluation standard based on the assessment item. Do you understand two important categories, right? You should understand in this course. Make sense? All of the content, we are going to focus on these two issues during the semester. This is the goal and objective. After deciding goal and objective, what did I do? I separate a lot of different categories and then organize, right? Assessment as well as instruction, right? What is the first instruction? NCTM standard. Why am I doing this? I really want you to develop the category assessment as well as conceptual framework. Make sense to you? Related to assessment. Do you understand now at least what is the goal? What is the purpose of this course, right? Make sense to you? And group presentation. Let's see. 오늘 은중이가 안 왔죠? 은중이하고 문기하고. 그룹이 what about those students who didn't decide yet your group member? Can I just randomly assign? I just want to hear your opinion about to make how to make your group member. Any suggestion? Who didn't among who didn't your group member decide yet? Any suggestion? Well, can I just randomly assign? I will think about anyway the member who didn't decide yet, your group. If you do have any suggestion, please let me know after finishing the class, okay? I'm going to consider in that way. 이둘의 심재훈, 김병수, 김정문. If possible, you can add one more person. It's much more convenient in terms of making the other group, if possible. But you don't have to. But I suggest because there are only 4 persons right now, okay, in your group. What about 서영락, 서혜윤, 김진건, 이성용? Can you add one more person if possible? In the same way, but you don't have to. But I suggest, okay? If if you can, it's much more easier to organize the whole group. Anyway, think about it. Okay? 지금 아직 I'm going to call the names who didn't decide yet, the group members. 김종일, 이영기, 이승주, 남윤묵, 김기훈, 이시연, 이윤서, 고영경, 엄다영, 최유락, 오신아, 노시윤. Do you understand? So anyway, the two group you need to think about. You can add one more person or whatever you want. But anyway, it's much more convenient if you are going to add one more person to your group. Any question until now? So do you understand the 6th standard? Related to assessment? Today is September 4th, right? I'm going to call number 4, number 14, number 24. Then 김규훈. After looking at the 6th standard, so what do you feel about assessment? I just explained all the 6th standard related to assessment. So I'm just wondering, before looking at the 6th standard, right? You have something in your mind related to assessment, right? After looking at the 6th standard, carefully, each of them, what do you feel? Is there any change in your mind related to assessment? 아니요. You can speak in Korean because Yeah, that's a really good answer. What about Yi Xian? What do you feel about the assessment? I can, if you're going to be a teacher, you can still do that by using performance task. Nowadays in the school, right? Many teachers are using performance task or performance assessment. It is called in Korean 수행평가. Right? That's a really good source from my perspective. You need to think about. What about Sujong, 24? Sujong. Just your feeling, your thought about the assessment after listening, 6 standards. That's a good point as well, I think. 신일순. 좀 크게 말해주세요. 이쪽은 잘 안 들릴 것 같아. 네. Speak aloud. 네. Maybe during the semester you are going to have opportunity, because that's why I really want you to collect student actual responses data. Okay, even if you are going to develop evaluation standard or rubric, you haven't never thought about student responses like that way, and you need to revise your rubric, right? Then that's why I organized final project in that way. Okay, why you need to collect student actual responses. Even if you are going to develop very good mathematical problem, that's not going to be enough as a pre-service teacher, right? You're supposed to evaluate student responses, right? But how to evaluate? Not only from your head, okay, or from your idea, but also based on what? Student actual responses. After looking at student actual responses, you may develop better. Oh, I have never thought about this solution. Oh, I have never thought about this approach. Oh, I have never thought about this kind of simple answer. I thought this is very complicated solution, but all of a sudden, student realized very simple solution. This is the answer, right? That's why bidirectional communication is so important in terms of assessment. What about Kim Jong-il? After finishing the class, I'm going to upload this PPT. Always, after finishing each class, I'm going to upload PPT file, PowerPoint file on the EKU website. Okay, you can take a look at this PPT file anytime. Okay. So I'm going to explain a little bit more about term. take a look at, for instance, performance assessment. In Korean, it is called 수행평가, right? Why nowadays performance assessment is emphasized in Korea? Also, many teachers are interested in performance assessment in their classroom. Why is that? Because not only result, but also performing process is another important perspective in learning mathematics. Therefore, many teachers are interested in performance assessment, right? Even I do know one teacher. She is going to consider participation into classroom. She is scoring about how much students participate in classroom. For instance, during the semester, how many questions he or she would ask. But the question should be significant one, not just in a simple question, right? Oh, teacher, I want to go to restroom. That's not going to be question, okay? Related to mathematics. That's going to be participation rate in performance assessment. Also, constructive response assessment, mathematical essay, a lot of different kind of performance assessment, oral assessment. However, you test it as oral assessment while you're in middle school or high school? No? Never? Just only written assessment? I think that's not a good way, right? Because in oral assessment is another important skill. But if you're going to enter any company, right, there is interview process, right? That is oral assessment, right? And you think about self-evaluation as well, peer evaluation, which I'm going to use, right? Project, a lot of performance assessment you can think of. A constructive response assessment, it is called in Korean 서술형 평가. Well, versus mathematical essay 수리논술. Or what do you think, why they are different? I'm going to just provide you one definition from one math educator. So you need to think about what is the differences between two of them. There is no fixed definition about them, okay? That's why I just provide you an example, one representative probably definition. So during the semester, you need to think about what is the differences between two of them. 서술형 평가, 수립논술. In English, constructive response assessment and mathematical essay. What kind of differences between two of them? How they are different? You need to think about it. Maybe during the semester, maybe at the end of the semester, you may answer to that question, but maybe not right now. And you are going to discuss a lot about this issue. But difference between two of them is not important issue. After looking at the difference between two of them, you can realize, oh, different assessment style, right? That's why I'm emphasizing the difference between two of them, right? What is a PA? Performance assessment, right? I just used the initial. Can you read? Because this is Korean definition, that's why I used it just followed in Korean. This is one definition. Performance assessment include constructive response assessment as well as maybe mathematical essay. This is one perspective. You need to think about what is performance assessment, what is constructive response assessment, what about the mathematical essay, what is ME, what is CA, what is PA. Do you understand what is the initial, right? What is a PA? Performance assessment. What about the CA? Constructive response assessment, inquiry and 서술형 평가. What about ME? Mathematical essay, 수리 논술. One definition, for instance, essay. Can you read? 어떤 문제 상황에 대하여 자신의 견해나 주장을 논리적으로 진술하는 것이다 라고 강옥기 교수님 정의하고 있어요. What about 수리 논술? ME, he defined as well 어떤 문제 상황에 대하여 자신의 견해나 주장을 수학을 근거로 하여 논리적으로 진술하는 것라고 정의하고 있어요. What about the, constructive responses assessment? What is the difference then? They are different or they are the same? I just want to address the question. You don't have to answer right now. Just you need to think about. Because we are often using these three terms, right? Often. You also can read many times in the newspaper or in any math education textbook, right? 서술형 평가, 수행 평가, 수리 논술, right? But have you ever thought about the differences between or among them? Anyway, during the semester, you are going to have a chance, to discuss this issue. 서술형, 수리 논술. How to evaluate students doing mathematics in assessment in order to appeal to their curiosity and intellect simultaneously. In order to make any assessment item, you need to ask yourself this question, right? Assessment, as I said, is not just to evaluate student ability or student understanding of mathematics. One of the simple answers probably, if your student can be actively engaged in doing mathematics, they may be motivated enough to perform their best in the classroom and on assignment. I'm not saying this is not the answer. I'm just saying this can be an answer. Just you need to think about what is the better way. Well, you need to think about before deciding the answer, right? What is the, by the way, do mathematics? Right? That's correct, that's appropriate question, right? What is the do mathematics? According to the NCTM standard, there are 5 do mathematics defined. Can you read? What is the first one? What about second one? What about third one? What about fourth one? What about the last one? Have you ever thought about this issue? Maybe you may learn the NCTM standard, then you may know 5 components in doing mathematics. So based on this doing mathematics, I'm going to explain to you why these 5 components should be considered in your assessment as well as in your instruction. They are interwoven process, all of them related to each other. Therefore, you need to think about while you're teaching, even while you're developing your assessment, you need to think about 5 different components. Okay? I'm going to take a look at only one content today. Problem solving should enable all students. Let me ask you one simple question. What is the problem solving? What is your definition from your perspective? You do know that term, right? In Korean. What is the problem solving? If you're going to teacher, for instance, student can do problem solving, then what kind of expectation can you describe? 철호야. 정철호. 어디에 있어요? 얼굴이 왜 그리 안 보이냐? Do you think, from your perspective, what is problem solving? 문 좀 닫아줄래?
자신의 그 문제 해결 방법을 이제 생각을 하고 그거를 이용하여서 결과를 자기 결과를 도출해.
That's a really good answer. What about others? Any other aspect in the problem solving, do you think? Anyone? Charo just defined, right? What is the problem solving from his perspective? Anyone? Something is missing, do you think, in problem solving? Anything? That definition is enough from your perspective in problem solving? That's a really good definition though. Take a look at, for instance, you may never thought about this way, but one important component from problem solving according to the NCTM standard, build new mathematical knowledge through problem solving. But I experienced while I was a high school student. After solving, some mathematical problem, I expanded my mathematical knowledge. Do you agree with that? For instance, what about relationship between the center and circle, right? Right? I thought, at the first, if a center is given, I can easily find it out, the circle formula. But all of a sudden, I realized after, the 3 point given, right, on the circle, I still can solve the problem, right? Oh, I realized center don't have to, provide in order to find out, the formula of circle, right? That makes sense? My knowledge, right? New knowledge can be expanded, right? By using problem solving. What about solve problem that arise in mathematics and in other contexts? Do you agree with that? For instance, what about physics? What about science, right? A lot of application problem can be provided. Oh, mathematics can be used in this context, right? What about sports? What about music? What about art? Right? If you're going to provide that problem through the problem solving process, student can expand, right? Oh, mathematics, right, can be realized, right, from other contexts, not only in mathematics. What about applying, adapt a variety of appropriate strategy to solve problem, right? There only one approach or one strategy to solve the problem? No, right? Can you remember in linear equation? There are 3 different approaches, right? You are emphasizing. One is substitution. Y equal to ax plus b, y equal to cx plus d. Then what can you emphasize, right? Substitution method, right? What about others? Different strategies should be emphasized, right, in problem solving. What about the last one? Monitor and reflect on the process of mathematical problem solving. This is the kind of, meta rule, metacognition, right? But one of the important things you should emphasize, right, in problem solving this process. This is often called metacognition or meta rule in math education. So monitoring reflection on the process of mathematical problem solving. You already experienced this kind of thing, right? After solving any mathematical problem, all of a sudden you reflect on that solution. Oh, this is not correct. This is problematic because I missed some point, right? That is monitoring and reflection. That makes sense? But you should understand these 4 components in the problem solving. Next time, I'm going to also emphasize 4 other doing mathematics. And then based on this doing mathematics, you can develop mathematical assessment item, right? what kind of problem-solving aspect I'm going to assess, right, by using this content. That's why I'm emphasizing doing mathematics 5 different components, right, to improve your ability to make assessment item, okay? Okay, any question? Okay, that's all for today. I'm going to continue this content next class.